Family, welcome to the Spiritual Counseling TV Network and welcome to another episode of the Mindset Talks. My name is Christie Ramirez and I'm your soul coach. So these shows are about psychology. We bring in mental health issues and I make them absolutely free because I just want to give you all some education and knowledge about this theme when it comes to therapy. And if, of course, you want extra personal guidance, that's where you book a personal soul coaching session. So thank you all for being here today and watching today's video. Let's have some nice coffee time and let us just relax into this deep conversation for today. The theme for today is breaking the anxiety cycle. Now I know that we briefly touched on this topic on the first episode, but I want to dedicate just an episode to anxiety because I know that this is something that many people deal with on an individual and also collective level. And even though it's common, it doesn't make it normal. So we really want to learn how to battle this and be able to give ourselves that therapy and be able to talk ourselves out of that fear, because that's what anxiety is basically. It is created by fear, and people who live in fear are not really living at all, right? Because that's missing out on life, that's holding back, and we don't want to be that person that is not really enjoying the juice of life, right? So part of today's topic is being able to be more carefree and lighthearted, and this begins with our attitude, with our emotion, and of course these symptoms that can manifest as a result of our thought process. And anxiety is a result of a negative thought process. That's basically what it is. It's a fear-based mentality that is creating this anxiety. Now, of course, there are many different causes of anxiety. We all know that. So let's go over a brief few of those so that we can kind of categorize the different kinds of anxiety. Right. So let's begin with the anxiety that is a result of actual stress. Maybe work overload, maybe financial crisis, maybe actual danger, but I want to actually leave that one for another category. So today's first category is all about just stress from overworking, overwhelm. Maybe you have a lot to do on your to-do list. Maybe you have a lot of responsibilities that you're burdened with, either in a family, in a business, or in your life as general. Maybe you're in one of those life phases in your life that requires a lot of change, and maybe you're still in that transition phase in your life, and that can create a lot of anxiety. And the secret with this one is that this one's actually the easiest one to overcome, because this is all about a shift in perspective. That's all really it is. When you realize that the things that you need to do on your to-do list per se, it might seem like a lot, but when you take it one breath at a time and one thing at a time, then that stress that was clouding your judgment and even your ability to enjoy the present moment is going to be removed. And the shift in perspective as well, that sometimes, stress can be a good thing, right? Because it motivates us and drives us to want to work harder, to be better, and to achieve. And this is what a goal getter is about. and we don't want to stay stagnant in life. So we need to sometimes embrace this anxiety that comes along with stress, change, growing up, evolving, improving ourselves, right? So when you shift your perspective and give anxiety a positive connotation, then everything else changes, because it's not going to affect you physically negatively the same way as if you embrace it and see it as a stepping stone and as a growing pain in a way, right? So this is interesting because it's kind of like putting a requirement that we must experience anxiety to know that we are actually moving forward. And when we know that we're experiencing anxiety, we know that we're on the right track and that we're continually growing. But then we confront it differently, and it's not gonna have power over us, but rather we're gonna have power over that anxiety, you see? So it's a game changer when you shift this mindset, and it's very powerful. So let's now move on to the second category of stress. What would be a second category of stress? A second category of stress for today would be actual, let's say, fear from maybe your life is in danger and you're in this fight or flight mode. Okay, so that is more of a rightful time to have anxiety, right? Because it's firing up your autonomic system to be able to prepare you for this fight or flight, to be able to take action and not stay frozen in that danger, right? So then how would you approach that situation? Because in this case, anxiety is actually serving you, you see? So again, this kind of ties in with number one, because by shifting our perspective and just letting it be, it's kind of like when you're in trouble and you experience this a little bit of an adrenaline rush. It's a good thing because it allowed you to get that thing done in that time frame that it needed to get done. If you weren't experiencing any anxiety or any kind of like surge in energy, then perhaps you wouldn't make it out in time. You would actually succumb to the danger, and then that's when the threat becomes real, right? So we need to see it as a positive. So in that case, how do we deal with anxiety? This is about now the trauma after that anxiety moment, right? Because in this case scenario, anxiety is serving you, right? But then what about after the event? That's when traumas are created. And believe it or not, people will relive that experience, that anxious experience, many times over in their life, if not healed, if not taken a look at. And this is again why we dedicate so much time in my spiritual counseling TV network to our therapy sessions based on trauma recovery, because this can be applied to any scenario in your life. And everybody has traumas. Whether it be anxious or not, it created a very bad moment in that time, right? And these emotions stay stuck with us unless healed and unless really confronted, raw and truly honestly. And so that would be my suggestion for this case scenario, is to seek trauma recovery therapy, because it's not in the moment that the anxiety was a bad thing. It was actually a good thing. But the bad thing is the repercussion after. And we don't want that to affect our quality of life and future relationships, right? And especially also, that can even create minor triggers from situations that might have similarities with what happened in that traumatic event, but might not have anything really to go to that point. And then that's when you get triggered a lot, or when you create distrust in people, and then that creates issues in life, right? So we want to break all those cycles, the anxiety cycle, and be able to move and progress forward with our life. So that would be the second category. Now the third category would actually be different kinds of phobias, right? Because we're talking about now like the actual, let's call it the DSM labeled anxiety disorders, because there's many different categories again. There's the generalized anxiety disorder, There's specific phobias, like if you're scared of like an animal, like let's say you're scared of spiders or snakes or thunderstorms, or maybe you have a trauma with actual being out in social events, so social anxiety. Maybe you have agoraphobia, which means kind of like claustrophobia, which means that you have an anxiety reaction when you're in an enclosed space and feel like you can't escape. That's another form of anxiety. So how do we deal with this third category of anxiety? Because this third category of anxiety now can be labeled and can actually, they can be considered a disorder, right? A mental disorder. But again, I don't like to really label, and I like to believe that there's always a natural way of healing. And so my suggestion again would be shifting the perspective, but in a different way, right? Because what is there really to be afraid of? This is where even desensitization, which is a therapy method, when you expose the client little by little, or at least to similar events, or in controlled events, so that they can slowly start exposing themselves to that fear, and then when they face, okay, so that way when they face the real thing, it's not as bad, right? So this is a little bit of just like a slow exposure in a controlled manner. And so I brought the little firework here with us today just to kind of make it more cozy, help us to think deeper. But you know, at the end of the day, anxiety affects all of us. So this is nothing to feel ashamed about. It's nothing to feel embarrassed about, but rather it's very important to talk about it, especially if this is something that's really ruling your life and taking over it, right? We want to be able to let it out and release it. So definitely, you know, talk about it with an expert or with a family member. An emotional support system is very important to have when dealing with any mental health issue, because, you know, at the end of the day, that's how we all connect as human beings, by talking it out, by relating to one another, to our life events, our life story. And maybe your way of coping could actually help someone else. So don't ever close yourself to this. Don't ever stay in the closet per se and not share this part of you, because you'd be surprised. Okay, so the fourth category, I'm going to separate those two last ones. Okay, so what about social anxiety? Because this is something that's just a different ballgame as well. Social anxiety affects a lot of people as well. Many times in the younger generation, but really it affects any generation. And how do we deal with this? You know, what is it part of the social anxiety that's actually creating this inner fear of being out with others in the world? And, you know, if I'm to bring a little bit of spiritual content in here, it definitely can be because this person is an empath, and feeling other people's energies can feel overwhelming. I've had a lot of clients come to me that way, and that's what it really was. It was just because there was just so many different kind of energies around them, and their auric field wasn't strong enough to be impenetrable. Okay, and so they were dealing with not only their emotions but also other people's emotions. So of course it's very difficult in that moment to decipher whose anxiety really is it, or why the anxiety is there, because maybe the anxiety is created by just an overwhelm of different emotions that you don't understand even, and creates confusion, and confusion creates doubt, insecurity, and then of course anxiety, because the opposite of anxiety is being in a solid state where you know your emotions, you know your truth, and you know the path, right? But when there's any mesh of confusion, this can create anxiety. So for this person with social anxiety, it's more about strengthening their own sense of self, so that being amongst people, they can retain this assertiveness with self. And this is again where my I Knew You Tell Me So What You program really comes in, because I do talk a lot about this assertiveness, how to set boundaries physically but also energetically, because believe it or not, the way that you carry yourself, the way that you are in the world is just going to energetically say volumes about you, speak volumes about you, right? And so the way to stay impenetrable is just to retain your sense of self. So in order, obviously, to retain our sense of self, we must first know who we are, right? Who this self within is. And that's what the spiritual journey and the spiritual awakening is all about. It's about discovering our true self. And that way, when you're amongst people, you're not enmeshing, which is actually a psychological term in the Bowen theory, and then picking off personality traits from other people that are not yours. And this is why a lot of children, I used to work at a school, have this issue, especially when it comes to their peers, to their circle of friends, and then like bullying and all that stuff, because they're not really even sure of who they really are, because they've never had that opportunity to distinguish themselves and to disassociate themselves from the crowd. And that's why it's imperative on the spiritual journey to really spend a lot of time in solitude to discover your true self. And that way, when you go out into the world, you are a stronger sense of self. And this inner knowing of who you really are is going to stay there. And nothing exterior can ever influence that. Because that's the thing. When you're in a vulnerable state because of lack of inner self-awareness, this means that you are too moldable per se. And not really in your truth. And that's going to create instability. And this instability of emotional instability is what creates anxiety. So that's my next tip, is really know who you are within. Spend time in solitude to clear your energy, but also to do your soul search and inner healing, to discover who you really are. And, this is something that even Osho, who is a spiritual teacher, why he recommends that children who are born from the first years from 1 to 7, that they don't go to school yet and be amongst peers, because that's when they're most influenceable. And it's in those early years 1 to 7, that are imperative to forming who they are going to become into their adulthood and shape their personality. So we want to make sure that we're around good influencing people. And if you're a parent and you have children below the years of 7 or even 10, protect them with your life and teach them good values from day one, because that's who they are going to become when they grow older. So that's a wonderful tip right now for when it comes to healing this social anxiety, because that's not a great way to live, right? We all need each other. And if people are dealing with social anxiety, then there's an issue with connection, which is another theme as well in my I Knew You Tell Me Soul Coaching program. And there's too much isolation. And I'm not talking about the spiritual isolation that's recommended, hence more of the solitude. But now I'm talking about isolation because of fear. It's a very different vibe, and who wants to be in that vibe, right? Because let's say, usually people in this state will not leave their house, not because they're doing their inner soul searching, but because they're actually afraid of going out. And that's what agoraphobia is. And that's what creates really a lot of mental instability. Now, I've never experienced that firsthand, but I have experienced the solitude for spiritual purposes. And it's very different, because the solitude for spiritual purpose is actually a very beautiful experience. It's very heavenly and it's very healing and soothing. And actually, you don't feel alone. So you don't want to leave, not because you're afraid or anything, but it's because you feel more alive than ever and connected to yourself, your true higher self, and you're learning more about the journey, and you're connecting to your angels, you're connecting to God. But then when people are in this state of isolation because they're afraid, or because of a trauma, or because of just anything that, maybe they got bullied in school, anything that's just negative, in that alone time, do you think they're going to be in a positive state? Most likely not. So they're just hoarding more and more negativity around them, and that's not healthy emotionally. So we really, whoever needs to, in that situation, needs to get out of that by reminding themselves that the past will not repeat itself, because you've grown wiser and stronger from those traumas, from all those past experiences, and they served its purpose. And that's what really helps us to all grow spiritually, even those people who are in isolation because of past fears. All right, so that's I feel like I've said a lot about anxiety. Let's see if anything else wants to come through. I do want to remind you all that if you want to learn more about psychology and mental health, definitely check out the therapy sessions, the motivational speeches exclusive here at the Spiritual Counseling TV network. And I will also be preparing future psychology lectures to give only to my exclusive members. They're like special events that I will be hosting, and of course I will be announcing pre-hand to notify all of you. And you know, I feel like this is it for today's conversation. Very brief and to the point. These mindset talks are not meant to be long. They're kind of like just short and sweet, right? To just give us this information when it comes to changing our mindset, because really it's all in the mindset, right? And when we can mold and have power over our mindset, then everything in your life will change at your favor, because you're gonna know how to use everything that happens for you and not to you to your advantage, because that's what it is. The universe is always working with us, not against us. So we need to remember this and not be anxious because maybe of the unknown. You know, that's actually another category, which let's bring it in. Category number 5, anxiety because of the unknown, of what's going to happen next. Many people have anxiety about their future, not being where they want to be in the moment, and then fearing what's going to happen in the future. And again, that's also not a way to live, because we want to bring our focus into this moment. And if you're away from this moment, this means that you're either stuck in the past, which is category number 5, or you're stuck in the future. And none of those does any good, because those are both in the air. They're not tangible. It's not your current reality. And we want to be able to set boundaries with that and distinguish the fine line and not miss out in this moment. And so when you remember that, you remember to breathe and ground yourself in this moment. Whatever is happening, everything else around you is just going to flow more even gracefully. And this anxiety will dissipate on its own, as if by a miracle, because it's really subconscious work that is going on here. And that's what we need to tackle. The mindset is going to target the subconscious mind, the thoughts and emotions that are surfacing up as physical symptoms, which can be in your mental space or in your physical space. So of course this is a mental symptom, anxiety, but physically it can manifest into many things. You know, there's a lot of physical symptoms and illnesses that actually are sparked and triggered by stress, anxiety, and we don't want to get to that point as well. So just remember this, my friends. Thank you, my soul family, for joining me today in today's Mindset Talk. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please become a member of my Spiritual Counseling TV network at christieramirez.com/TV, and also sign up to my free mailing list to receive my weekly and monthly newsletters with extra blog articles. And make sure that you check out all my exclusive educational content, such as my Women's Forum Empowerment series, the Mindset Talks, again, all that other content about therapy, motivational speeches, the Couples Therapy Talk Show, my Q&A radio show, and also my free content on a monthly basis, which is the Love Show and the Fashion Show Red Carpet event. Thank you all for joining me here today. I'll see you all next time. Namaste.